amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello, listeners. Once again, it's terrific to be back with you. An author needs a great agent, one who knows the changing climate of the literary world, one who is always at your back, fights for your rights, and has the wisdom to know how to give you constructive criticism that helps lead you to a successful publication. And today my guest is such a lady, the highly successful and much-loved literary agent Selwa Anthony. I first met Selwa many years ago when I was endeavouring to have my first novel published. After giving me invaluable advice with my manuscript and finding me a terrific editor, not only did Selwa get me a deal with HarperCollins, but she also became a great friend and mentor. And every one of her authors you speak to has the same thing to say about Selwa. Selwa has written 3 books: The Lebanese Cookbook, co-authored with her 2 sisters, the 2 little positive thinking books, Succeed with Me, and Wake Up, Shake Up, Stand Up with Jimmy Thompson. A legend in the publishing industry, she has seen the dreams of so many authors come to fruition. Welcome, Selwa.
Thank you, Rosemary, and a lovely introduction.
Oh,
I have to live up to it now. I have to live up to it now.
Well and truly deserved. So, Selwa, I believe you were born in Cara in New South Wales after your father migrated from Lebanon in the 1920s. Mm-hmm. Was it your father who, he loved writers like Lawson and Patterson, who gave you your first love of books, and in particular Australian books?
Yes, it was interesting because he spoke English and French and came out here as a young man and fell in love with Australian writers. So he then introduced, at the age of 4 or 5, he gave me my first library card and told me to go up to the local council chambers that they'd set up a library. And it was like Alice in Wonderland, I felt, with all these books. And from that minute on, books have been my first love.
Oh, how wonderful. And your career began in the book section, sort of a large department store in the 1960s. And later you became marketing manager for a major book company, where you're the first manager to feature Australian books at the front of the store. Tell us about this and who perhaps some of those first authors were.
Well, when I started as a bookseller, I was at a department store, David Jones, the lower ground floor. Then over the years, I then came back into bookselling and ended up having a job on the corner of Pitt and Hunter Street in Sydney, which was a very strong business area. And I noticed that at that time, most of the books we were selling were overseas, English writers, American writers, all different other sort of subjects but coming from overseas. And then the Thornbirds happened.
Right, and yes. With Colleen McCulloch.
Yes.
I was going to just ask you about that a little bit later, but just very quickly, during that time you had your own radio book chat program syndicated throughout Australia, and you reviewed books on the midday movie show with Bill Collins. Now that must have been fun.
Well, it was fun. I'm a bit of a marketer, and I love talking to people. And my first opportunity was a radio station. At the time, it was 2UE in Sydney, and then became 2GB. And there was a nighttime program, and every night it was a different subject that the radio announcer had, and it was always to do with someone. Have you been divorced? What's it like being single? Every night it was a different subject. And this particular evening, I heard him doing books. Have you read any good books lately? I listened, and I thought, oh, geez, not very good. And I listened for a few weeks, and then I was serving a customer this particular day and took his credit card and realised it was the name of the radio announcer, Ian Parry Oakton.
Oh, right.
And I looked up at him right behind the desk in the bookshop, and I said, you need some help with those book nights. And he said, well, okay, we'll work out. So every third Thursday for the next 5 years, I'd go into the studio at 9 o'clock, grab all the books I wanted to promote out of the shop, and we talked for 3 hours. It was open line, and I would put books and talk about books that I knew weren't very well known, but always doing something that's Australian. And I did say one time, Ian, you will love this book. It's called A Fortunate Life, and I feel it'll become an Australian classic.
Oh, and my word, it did, didn't it?
Yes, it certainly did. And
But
then I had I had review spots in Melbourne, in Queensland, in Adelaide. I'd just be on the phone like I am with you now, and I'd have 3 minutes to give a quick book review. And so I really looked and I thought to myself, where are the Australian novels? We only have the classics. We don't have any of these, Barbara Taylor Bradford and all,
yes.
and all the authors that were selling at the time, Jeffrey Archer and all those. So that was my passion. So we had 5 stores, and I made a point of bringing anything Australian to the front, which was mainly pictorial books and history books and things like that.
At that time. But going back now, of course, to the Thornboards and Colleen McCulloch, I believe it was Colleen who actually first inspired you to become an agent, because she said, Selwa has the best eye for a manuscript of anyone I have known and should become a literary agent. So in 1984, Selwa Anthony Author Management Agency was born. And
right.
I think the late Evan Green was your first popular fiction author. But
yes, he was.
Who were some of the other original authors in your stable?
Well, Di Morrissey was one.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah, Jennifer Batcher.
Yes.
And there was, on top of my head, there's things, Sorrel Wilby, who was an adventurer, a young woman that climbed the Mount Everest and then was the first woman to cross the mountains of Africa.
All right.
Only at the age of 21. Off the top of my head, I'm going a bit quiet here.
But there's certainly a lot that would be not be out there unless it was for you, quite frankly.
Well, yes, that inspired me. The Thornbirds inspired me because Colleen came into the shop for an author tour because it was the rage. It was the biggest bestseller in America.
Yes.
I had the novel sent to me before, and read it before she came out. And I had a very good clientele anyhow. And I had a signing session, and Colleen wandered in, and I found out that she drinks coffee with milk and a lot of sugar, a chain smoker, and she didn't like orange or yellow flowers.
All right.
And I had a very young staff. They were all enthusiastic. So we set everything up. I had the window, lots of windows, but the biggest one had the look of the thorn tree that was on the cover, and just a dry branch with a bird sitting in it, and said, Colleen McCulloch, please order your books in advance. So we had about 100 orders before she even came in. And then we sat there. As she walked in, she had the 4 corners doing the whole coverage of her tour.
Four corners on the ABC.
ABC.
Yes.
So that was very much what was happening in those days.
Right.
And then she sat down. First of all, she said, oh, this is a real bookshop. And I looked at her and she said, I've just come back. And one of the stores was a department store. They put me in the lingerie department.
Oh, how lovely. Now, you were never actually Colleen's agent, but you did end up being lifelong friends. And in fact, even well after her death, you were still involved, weren't you, with her estate and other things?
Everything. I would classify her as one of my best friends, and she always spent time with our family. My mother adored her, and my mother loved lots of jewellery, and Colleen never wore any. So every time she visited, she'd buy Mum some beautiful pieces of jewellery. So we still keep them. That's a memory. But sadly, I got caught up in the court case where I was sort of executor for the will, and I had what was the correct will, or I believed was, but it didn't work out in court, so she lost everything.
It's actually extraordinary. My last guest was Noel Whittaker, and who has just written a book all about wills. And, of course, he was explaining the difficulties of, when you don't leave a will, but also when there's a couple of wills, and as to, which one is right. And then the difficulties of being an executor. And it's not an easy job, is it?
Not an easy job, and because I was representing the University of Oklahoma, and that's where she wanted all her values to go to.
Right.
But they couldn't be represented unless they had an Australian person, which was, of course, me. I would have preferred not to have done it, but I did, and I don't regret it. But, that's the way the world is at the moment.
Yes.
And we just have to believe in what we feel is the right thing. And she was my friend, and I did the very best for her.
And Selwa, she left the most incredible legacy behind, didn't she, of books? I mean, not just Australian books, but she wrote all those historical books as well.
Books. They were amazing because that's what she wanted. She wanted the money that she got from her fiction, and the Roman books were fiction based on fact, but they were fairly serious. But
Yes.
As she accumulated her fortune, she then hired a researcher and sent her all around the world. She had the biggest library of Roman books,
Right.
private library of Roman books in the world.
Yes.
And she then researched. She did the whole
Long before the internet.
Yes, before, and she still used a typewriter till the day she died.
Oh,
And
really? Sitting in her lovely house on Norfolk Island, no doubt.
Yes, well, most of it, yes. She spent a couple of years in Sydney, just round the corner from where I live.
Right.
And from there for her last couple of novels, because she had to have a lot of medical treatment towards the end of it.
Okay.
And yes, but the Roman books were what she felt she loved, and that's why the Oklahoma University, they'd made her a doctor, an honorary doctor there. And
an incredible woman. But look, it's not just totally sort of Australian rural fiction or Australian romance fiction. You also do crime or have crime novelists like the international best-selling author Tara Moss. Now, she's had an incredible career, hasn't she?
She has, a lovely young girl that arrived in Australia, a model at the age of
Beautiful
21.
looking, yes.
I was fortunate enough to be introduced to her through a writing class that she was in, and we clicked straight away. She had a half-finished manuscript. That was the beginning of her writing career, and so she's into her, I think it's the 7th or 8th novel now, all crime, but she did 2 non-fiction books too on femininity, the feminist side of her life. A very successful author. And, there's so many of my authors that have done well. They're all Australian, but
Yes.
we are always competing with the UK market. Now the American market is coming in because of TikTok.
I know, you and I talked about that the other day. I mean, there's an author called Colleen Hoover who had, at one stage, I think she had 4 books on the best-selling list. And I was talking to Fiona Steger, who owns 3 bookshops here in Brisbane, and she was saying, just like you, it was a phenomenal TikTok, wasn't it, thing that sort of got it going.
Yes, but the sad thing is now where the most of the success as in fiction that I've had and I've encouraged is in the area that you wrote your book, The Homestead on the River, for the women from the age of 30 onwards. And all the authors like Di Morrissey and any of the authors of historical Australian fiction were doing very, very well. But now I send similar manuscripts that I know are very publishable and should be.
Yes.
And the answer I'm getting from publishers, so we have to be guided by TikTok. They have to be younger writers writing books for younger readers and fantasy with explicit sex.
Right.
And that's sad because the younger generation are not reading books to understand the difference between a good writer and just an ordinary writer.
It is, yes, it's extraordinary. It more or less, I think you said to me, and Fiona might have said as well, that it depends a lot. The publisher says, well, how many followers have you got? Unless you've got millions or thousands or whatever, they don't so much look at you. But there isn't a market now. We had Bonnie Hancock on our show a few weeks ago, and she had the most, of course, amazing story about kayaking around Australia. And I believe you've just negotiated a second run on her terrific book, which is The Girl Who Touched the Stars. So you're also, taking on authors that just have incredible stories, real life stories to tell.
Well, yes, but the first one I ever took on when I first started was In the Middle of Nowhere by Terry Underwood. Now, that's going back 25 years more. She was a Sydney nurse, and she wrote it as she moved from the world she knew, which was the city life and the nursing life, to the middle of nowhere. And she always said that when John took her to show her where he lived, she had a white suit on and got off this little plane. And before she walked 2 feet in front of her, all the dress was covered in red dust.
Oh, right.
And then he said, "This is where the girl I marry is going to be living."
Right.
And she said to herself, "Lucky, what a lucky girl," mumbled, "what an unlucky girl."
Oh.
She ended up marrying him. That's the story. So if there's any readers out there.
Yes, I remember reading it, and fabulous.
That's now a classic.
Yeah.
And it's on audio, In the Middle of Nowhere by Terry Underwood. That's sort of the beginning of my memoir side, because I've done a lot of memoirs over the years. And I've got one coming out next year, which is by Jacinta Price.
Oh, right. I was going to ask you, yes, what sort of in the pipeline, but we'll just wait for 1 second to talk further about that, because listeners, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today, by telephone, I might add, is celebrated Australian literary agent Selwa Anthony, who lives in Sydney. Yes, so go back now, Selwa, and tell us what you have got in the pipeline.
Well, the one coming out early next year is Matters of the Heart,
right,
by Jacinta Price.
Gosh, and that'll be an incredible book, I would imagine.
It'd be amazing, and it's her memoir.
Yes.
There is a wonderful book, Anzac Day, coming out, and it's on Gallipoli, stories that had never been told before, and that's published by Hachette. We're still just getting the title right, but it's going to be a wonderful letters that have been found and put together by young men that were caught up in France, in a little village in France, and they were looked after by the French villagers there, but it's just one of those stories that you see what happened in those days, and the going to the war, and these young men that didn't know what they were going in for. But it's really something that hasn't been documented before.
Oh, well, that'll be terrific. So many of them, unfortunately, thought they were just going on an overseas trip. And they wanted to leave Australia. But as I said, you have a terrific variety of authors. But Selwa, you were one of the first to champion audiobooks. Now, I know that's, of course, great interest to our listeners, because obviously quite a few are sight impaired, and audiobooks have become such a huge part of not just people who are sight impaired, but everyday life. I listen to an audiobook every time I'm out walking, and my husband, I think, listens to more audiobooks now than he reads them. So you were very first and instrumentally getting those up and going.
Well, that was in the book-selling days when they came out in big thick pile of discs, and booksellers were saying, "Oh, they'll never work." And then when I became an agent, and then I became very good friends with Rebecca Herman, who is the co-founder of Belinda Audio Books,
yes,
with her husband, and I said, okay, every book I would keep the audio rights, because the publisher at that time were not interested in having the audio rights. So I was able to directly sell any book that I had published. Immediately the audio came out at the same time. So that's going back 20 years ago. So now look what's happened. So publishers now insist on having the audio in their contracts, because it's making money. That's probably the fastest selling part in publishing at the moment. E-books have stagnated a bit.
Right, and the audiobooks. And so many of the authors read their own books, which adds just that little extra personal bit to it, doesn't it? I know Bonnie's reading her own book, and so many, as I think probably Barack Obama, I said before, is sort of one of the not one of the first ones, but it really became sort of mainstream when he read his whole huge book, didn't he?
That's right. Well, another one coming out in October is your Celestial Compass. Compass. I was just getting it off the shelf and it nearly fell out of my hand.
Oh, what is that called again, Selwa?
Your Celestial Compass.
Oh, right, yes.
Astrology for Self-Discovery and Empowerment.
Oh, yes.
Yes, by Natasha Weber, Weber.
Yes.
And it is a very, very intelligent astrology book.
Right.
She does a regular spot on the morning show on Channel 7 every
Yes.
Monday.
Now, Selwa, so many of the publishing houses have merged and joined forces. So where, I mean, you as an agent must found where you might have had 10 or 15 publishing houses that you could send a book out to. Now, of course, it's shrunk, hasn't it?
About six that used to be 12
Right.
of major booksellers.
Yes.
There were the wonderful independent books, smaller ones.
Yes.
A few of them are still around, but most of them have been eaten up. And it breaks your heart because they're all owned outside of Australia. They're not Australian-owned publishing houses.
What we don't have, even sort of somebody like textbooks, so they're all owned.
Textbooks is Australian, but it does a lot of overseas publishing as well, and they're very good.
Right.
But they, again, because I don't have the vast choice now.
No.
So if something gets rejected 2 or 3 times, I'm thinking, well, where do I go from here?
Yes.
So it's very sad, and it's happening everywhere. Germany was one of the best countries for me to sell my Australian books to.
Right.
Australian-based books. And I had no trouble right up until about 5 years ago. And my agent there would take any of the novels that were published here that had an Australian landscape. And I said, why does Germany love these books? He said, it's romance and landscape. Both
Right.
things. Yes. But that's even closed up now.
Yes.
So I'm trying to get it across to the publishers in Australia to not lose the foothold they had up until all this new age of TikTok and Instagram and all that.
Exactly, and fantasy books and whatever. But now you have said to me, there's a certain, and I know there's a certain amount of luck, isn't there, in a book being published? And I believe the author who you discovered and mentored, making her famous, Kate Morton's popularity skyrocketed after her first book was named Book of the Year by Richard and Judy's Book Club in England. And, of course, if you manage to get Oprah Winfrey to say something about your book, well, that's sort of a highway to glory, isn't it?
Yes, also, and our lovely Australian actress, Nicole Kidman.
Nicole Kidman and Reese Witherspoon, if they pick up your book, well, you're made, aren't you, if they decide to make it into a series?
It's like winning the lottery, really it is. I say to my authors, getting published is winning the lottery the first time. Getting international acclaim is winning it the second time, and getting it made into a movie or TV series is winning it the third time. So,
well, there's almost sort of 3 bites at the cherry, isn't there? First of all, when you get your book published, then if they happen to sort of make it into a movie, well, then your book sales skyrocket, and then even again, if they decide to make that movie into a TV series, well, then you've got sort of third go at it, and your sales skyrocketed once more.
Exactly, and there's one other novel that came out last year called 67 Days, written by Yvonne Weldon,
right?
Who is an Indigenous woman.
Yes,
and just as a matter of luck, we met because her mum was born in the same town that I was, which is Cowra, New South Wales, and she's written this beautiful story. Now, you know how your novel, you sort of put the Irish background into it and the culture and everything, and then you get a Greek author that will do the same, and you get to learn about their culture. This is an Indigenous world, and it's set in the 80s in Sydney. She's a young girl going to university with a real problem that we know she has, and we have no idea what it is. But what you see is the world of the life of her family and the boy she meets and falls in love with.
Oh, how lovely!
It takes them to her hometown, which is Cowra, and so you learn the history and the family connection that we probably don't understand.
Another one to look out for. But now, Selwa, I'm going to ask you, have you ever had sort of a hugely successful book, something like, J.K. Rowling, I know, was sort of knocked back by about 10 publishers before somebody more or less picked it out of the wastepaper basket and then read it. And, of course, there must be so many agents and publishers that were tearing their hair out after her huge success. Have you sort of sat there and had somebody like that and think, oh, my God, perhaps I should have taken her on?
No,
Oh, right, fair enough.
No, have not. I have not. Honestly, I haven't.
Yeah.
I've had authors that have been rejected by the 5 or 6 publishers, and I still hung in there till they got picked up, and
Yes.
then they've become bestsellers. But luckily, I have not turned around and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I rejected that." So,
Oh, well, that's terrific. And I know one of your sayings that you subscribe to is never give in. And it's certainly not easy in the publishing world.
No.
And you've just got to keep trying and trying, haven't you?
yeah, well, I'd say I've seen the best of book selling, and I've seen the best of publishing as an agent. So that is something that, if I had time, I could document, because as a bookseller, if someone said, "What do you do for a living?" and you say, "I work in a fashion design," you might have a few conversations. But the minute you go somewhere and someone, it could be in a party, I run a bookshop.
Yes.
The conversation starts. All of a sudden, you're not just a retailer.
Right.
You're someone that has a lot of knowledge, and they want to talk to you about it. And that's what happens as a literary agent.
Yes.
If you said to me, if you only could have chosen one career, so what would it have been?
Yes.
This is going to be strange. It would be the bookseller. I was taught bookselling at an early age. Every second thing I think of and how did I know about that? I read it in a book.
Right.
Every day of my life in the bookshop, I learned something.
Oh.
And that's the beauty of books.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You can lose yourselves in it. One of your other sayings is, even when you are down, make yourself look your best, and people will respond to your positive thinking. Now, listeners, I must tell you that Selwa is always dressed to perfection, with her nails beautifully manicured and her hair absolutely superb. And it's important, isn't it? No matter what you are in life, whether you are a writer or whatever you are, to make yourself feel good.
I'm dressed up now talking to you.
Oh, yes.
9 o'clock in the morning. It's just as if I'm going to work and I'm going to be around a lot of people. It's just a natural thing. My mother was in retail all her life, and she set that example with 6, 7 children. So it makes you feel good and makes people feel that you care about yourself as well as them.
It makes a huge difference. But Selwa, look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our show. It is actually the first phone interview I've done here from the studio, so it'll be interesting to chat to Paul and make sure that it's all clear enough, etc., and perhaps hear back from our listeners. But Selwa Anthony, you're the celebrated Australian literary agent, for being our guest today. It has, as I've said, been an absolute pleasure. And am I allowed to say, Selwa, that if somebody does have a totally, completely sort of unique story that they might like to get out there, they could let me know and I might run it past you? Would that be it?
Yes, that's how it works. You can't find me otherwise, only because I'm hands-on and I can't have too many uninvited, what I'm saying, unsolicited.
I know. You would open your computer every morning and there'd probably be dozens and dozens. So anyway, they know where to find me, and I'm sure they've really enjoyed listening to you, and we might hopefully get you back again at some stage when your new books are out next year.
That'd be lovely, and I'll introduce you to some newer authors along the way, because you're doing a wonderful job, Rosemary. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Selwa. Thank you, and goodbye, listeners, and thank you, Paul.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.